Darlyce, and welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to get into the mysterious case of Dorothy Stratten. She was a beautiful soul and her life was gone too soon. She is infamously associated with Playboy. She was a Playboy model and a Playmate of the Year. However, she was involved in a toxic relationship that led her to her ultimate demise. Now, there's a lot of key pieces of information in this actual case, but we are going to talk about her entire life because there are a lot of characters in her story that are questionable, as well as had ulterior motives to her entire life story. So make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Let's get right into it. Now, Dorothy was from Canada and she was mainly raised by her mother due to her father being absent in her life. She had dealt with a lot of trials and tribulations, and by having a single mother, she also had to be a support system not only to her siblings, but also to help the household. So it is speculated that she had worked ever since the age of 7. Now, Dorothy faced a lot of tribulations. At the age of 13, she began smoking and developed an ulcer. And by the age of 16, she began to write poetry to express herself and communicate, because lots of people have described Dorothy as someone who was very shy and timid. So she really didn't have a voice, but through her poetry and her writings, she was able to eloquently express herself. And at 14, she started working at Dairy Queen, where she met her real official boyfriend, as well as her manager, to introduce her to Playboy. So in 1977, Paul Snyder walked into the Dairy Queen, and he was infamously known in that area as a pimp. He was trying to recruit girls so that he could get money. He noticed Dorothy, but after speaking with her, he noticed her shyness, how innocent she was. He decided to just introduce himself and talk to her. And upon just getting to know Dorothy, he was able to find out that Dorothy had only had one boyfriend in her entire life, but yet she was very intelligent, very smart. She had graduated from high school, the top third in her class. However, she dealt with a lot of trauma due to her father leaving at such a young age and her mother working hard and endlessly to provide for them. Now, Dorothy was 17 years old. Paul was much older than her. So obviously, not only did her mother not approve of this relationship, but most people in that area did find it very sleazy of Paul to take comfort in dating this young girl with little to no experience. Now, a little bit about Paul. He had a sleazy kind of shady background. He was known as the Jewish pimp, and he had been pimping for 10 years. So he made this a career in a way. He was arrested for drug possession and also for using girls within the Seattle area, Vancouver, and many other different places. However, Dorothy's innocence led her to believe that he was just a producer, a promoter, nothing more, nothing less, and even a manager. She had no idea of his shady past and how dark and seated it really was. Now, They had been dating for a year, and Paul kept trying to convince Dorothy to pose for Playboy. And at the age of 18, on the 25th anniversary of Playboy, he convinced Dorothy to pose for Playboy. Even though she really was uncomfortable, she was self-conscious. She didn't even undress in front of even her own family members. And it is also speculated that it took 6 months of Paul constantly pressuring her, tearing her down just to get her to pose for Playboy. But when she did, in 2 weeks alone, she got a call back to go to California to do an official shooting. Now, because she was underage, she was 18, but I believe you had to be 21 according to United States regulations, he had to try to convince her mother to go to California. Obviously, her mother was against it. So he forged her mother's name, and she was off to California by herself to pose for Playboy. This would not only be the first time she had gotten on a plane, but much less the first time she had ever left Canada. This was on August 13th, 1978, where Dorothy was officially to pose for Playboy, not under the influence of anyone except to please her boyfriend, Paul. So Dorothy ended up staying in California for 3 weeks. She test shot for Playboy. They loved her. She attended the parties, the gatherings, and like I previously stated, Dorothy was very young, very naive. She had only been with 2 people in her life. She was inexperienced. She had never even been outside of her hometown, much less had any of these opportunities afforded to her. And unfortunately, people took advantage of her innocence. People often called Playboy Disneyland because the people were the games and everyone just played with them. And with Dorothy, it was alleged that she was assaulted during that time that she first stepped foot in California for those 3 weeks by Hugh Hefner. It's alleged that something happened in the grotto against her will. She was not aware of the occurrence until it was too late. Now, during these 3 weeks, she also kept in constant communication with Paul. She even tried to convince him to come out there with her, be a support system. And we'll notice even throughout this incident, Dorothy looks up to Paul not only as her lover, but as a father figure, as a protector, someone she could truly confide in, and she honestly thought Paul had her best interest at hand. It is also speculated that Hugh Hefner ideally wanted Dorothy as a possible girlfriend, but he knew he could never break that bond of Paul always lingering in the background of Dorothy. He had this possession over her. Also, people often speculated that Dorothy was with Paul because she owed her success and her career to Paul. If it were not for Paul, she would have never even had this opportunity, this fame, and this success. So even though it appeared she did not like Paul, or she was falling out of love with Paul due to his possessive ways, she felt like she couldn't leave him because she owed him for her success. Now, because Dorothy was an immigrant, she was from Canada, she could only be allowed to stay in the United States, much less only work through the obligation of Playboy. So she decided to start working just to get some extra money at the LA Playboy Club as a waitress. And within this year of her living in California, she had lost 20 pounds. People had speculated either A, she was under the pressure of the Playboy image, but also B, because of Paul always putting the pressure on her for perfection. Now, originally, Dorothy was supposed to be the 25th anniversary playmate. However, they decided not to choose her for that shoot, but for the August shoot, just due to her maturity, her innocence, and her naive behavior, in a sense. They knew that she possibly couldn't handle the press as much as the media and balancing her relationship with Paul. Remember, Dorothy was very soft-spoken. She was not good in front of cameras. She was not good at talking. And so they thought that that might be too much for her and to wait a while. However, Paul was still on the move of pressuring Dorothy, but he decided to pressure her into getting married. He wanted to seal the deal of making sure that Dorothy was with him for better or for worse, till death do us part. So under pressure on June 1st, they decided to get married, but Dorothy started distancing herself. She didn't want to be intimate with him anymore. She constantly made excuses. She constantly kept herself busy with work so that she wouldn't have to interact with Paul. Not only did she grow distant between him being intimate, but she started to resent him. He spent a lot of her money, blew through most of her earnings, and he often pressured her, especially when she was beginning her acting career. He wanted to change her name, Kristen Shields. However, Playboy, as well as Dorothy, was against it. Now, as Dorothy's manager, he made it known that he wanted 50% of her earnings. Now, you would think if you truly loved Dorothy and you honored her, you would want what's best for her and not be concerned about money unless there was a bigger plan to getting married to her. Was it all just about love, or was it about something even more sinister? You wanted to get the money and run. So as Dorothy's career was starting to be on the uprise, she started to become more successful in the mainstream media with her acting gigs, especially being in the role of Galaxina and the TV show Buck Rogers. He started to resent her fame and her notoriety. However, Paul was trying to achieve success in his own right. He came up with the ideas of the Chippendales, of men wearing the bow ties and revealing and very sensual but dancing, just like the Playboy models. However, no one took Paul seriously. They actually took him as a joke. And before he could even get the idea patented, someone came in and stole his idea. So the infamous Chippendales originally came from Paul, but yet he was not successful in getting his just due. And that led him into extreme resentment, extreme hate. And we all know some people, when they get upset, they tend to take it out on the people that they love the most. And Paul did just that. Hugh Hefner had gifted Dorothy a puppy, just as a keepsake, as a nice gesture. However, Paul resented Dorothy. He resented that relationship. He was envious of Hugh Hefner trying to come in and do something nice for Dorothy, that he allegedly ended the puppy's life. Now, just about a year after Dorothy had gotten married to Paul on May 5th, 1980, Dorothy suggested to Paul that they get a separation, that they get some space just to think and just to try to see where things can go. And she said, in quote, "If you love me, set me free." Those words would ring such an ironic term later on. With Dorothy wanting to be set free, Paul became increasingly jealous and paranoid, because why would Dorothy want to be set free? Who does she want to be set to if she doesn't want to be with me? So he hired a private detective to figure out what was Dorothy doing. And also, if they were going to get a divorce, he wanted to make sure that he drained Dorothy of her earnings so that he could get her back if she was cheating. On June 26th, Dorothy filed for separation. And she even offered for Paul to get some help, to get some treatment, because she did notice his paranoia, his sense of possessiveness with her. Now, the ironic thing about Paul, when Dorothy filed for separation, instead of him asking for counseling, for help, for reconciliation, he went straight to the bank and drained their bank account of $15,000. And even though he had drained her of the entire account, Dorothy was okay with it. She just wanted to be set free. She just wanted to start a new life and not deal with the pressure of Paul treating her in a sinister way. Now, during the separation, Dorothy had fallen in love with Peter Donovich, and they were actually filming in New York. But little did Dorothy know was that Paul was watching her. Paul had hired a private investigator and noticed that she wasn't staying in the hotel that she stated she was staying in. She was staying with Peter instead. In a matter of 4 weeks, after being in New York, she would no longer be living. Now, after New York, Peter Donovich and Dorothy decided to do a quick little getaway for 10 days in London, kind of as a honeymoon, because she had fallen in love with Peter Donovich. She had fallen in love with Peter Donovich, and she was only 18. He was 39. But she felt like with Peter, she could truly be herself and be vulnerable in a way where she didn't feel like she was being controlled, manipulated, or being used for her money. She got back into the States. She decided to meet up with Paul for one last time to try to reconcile and just clear the air with him. However, before Dorothy was to meet up with Paul, he had just found out that he was barred from the Playboy Mansion. Due to Dorothy getting a divorce from Paul, Hugh Hefner, as well as the Playboy Enterprise, did not want anything to do with him at all, and that left him enraged. Now, Paul decides to borrow a gun from his friend, a .38 revolver. He also pressures the investigator, Goldstein, to get him an actual tool as well. But the private investigator refused to do this action. He just told him, focus on getting the divorce. We'll get the evidence to make sure your case is valid. Now, because Paul was an immigrant, he could only buy these tools through personal ads. Mind you, Paul had already moved on. He already had another girlfriend, Lynn, but he did not want to let go of Dorothy, or did not want to let go of the things that Dorothy came with: her fame, notoriety, and money. Dorothy had promised that she was going to call Paul when she got back in the States for them to talk and meet up and have lunch. However, when she was supposed to call, she didn't, and that left him enraged. On August the 11th, Dorothy had a photo shoot that day, and she tried to reach out to Paul, stating that she apologized. She was busy, she was working, but she would love to still meet up and talk. He wanted no parts. He started yelling, cursing, calling her out of her name, getting truly resentful towards her. Even on August 11th, when she was being cursed out by Paul, she promised she would come and see him. However, he had become so belligerent and so induced with drugs that he rescheduled talking with her that day. The next day, Paul met up with his lawyer, talking about getting half of Dorothy's earnings, if not all of her earnings, just due to her infidelity, due to what he owed, due to him even finding her and starting her career. The same day, Paul purchased a tool for $200. Now, with all of this harassment, phone calls, private investigators, we would often speculate, why didn't Dorothy just call the police and get a restraining order against Paul? He would automatically have been deported back to Canada, even just due to his drug condition. If she had just reported that, she would have never saw him again. But I think that speaks to the measure of Dorothy. Dorothy was inexperienced. She probably didn't want Paul to get in trouble. She just didn't want to be with him at all and just start new. So on Thursday, August 14th, Dorothy did her daily routine, did a morning swim. She met with her little sister Louise, and then she went to the bank to withdraw $1,000 and a green work card to give to Paul. She drove over to the house in her Oliver Green 67 Cougar, parked on the street to go and meet up with Paul at the house. Now, Paul was at the house by himself because his roommate, as well as the roommate's girlfriend, had stepped out for a while. They had stated that Paul would call them when they finished talking, and then they would come back over and see how everything went. Now, when Dorothy went into that house, this would be the last time anyone would ever see her, much less she would never leave out of that house alive. She walked in, she tried to reconcile with Paul, see how she could make things better. She was willing to give him everything if he just signed the papers for the divorce. Obviously, he refused, he got belligerent, and the next thing that I'm going to say is going to be very gory, very gruesome. If you want to skip this part, I definitely understand. But the details were horrendous and unfathomable. She was unrecognizable with all the things that he had done. He proceeded to place her on a bench that he had invented for when you get intimate. He had hit her. I'm gonna say hit loosely. When I say hit, he had used the tool to hit her on the left side of her face, causing her left hand fingers to come off. He then took her off of the bench, placed her on the bed, and got intimate with her lifeless body, then proceeded to write a suicide note with her lifeless body hanging there, and then ended his life as well. Now, at first, the roommates had came back to the house, not speculating anything, but I would think they could smell something. However, the only thing that they noticed that was peculiar was a trace of ants leading to his room. When they opened the door, they noticed that the ants had come from Dorothy's face, being unrecognizable. This case speaks to anyone who has been in any domestic violent relationship. Anyone who has ever felt like someone has tried to control them, if you feel like someone or you owe someone for your success, if you feel like you are in over your head, there is a way out. You don't need to reconcile with anyone. You should be able to just walk away, and that's it. Dorothy was gone too soon. She only was able to live out her dream as a superstar for just 2 years. But only in 2 years was she able to make an impact that would last even till today. Unfortunately, after her death, so many people exploited her. Not only did Paul Snyder's family exploit her, in the most gruesome way, but also the Playboy industry also exploited her. Now you would think Paul's family would have the most empathy for Dorothy's family throughout all of the pain that Paul caused Dorothy. However, they ended up getting majority of her earnings after her death. Paul's family received $20,000 of her estate, while Dorothy's family only received $5,000. Tell me, where is the justice in all that? That is the most shameful piece of information that I think I found when it came to the after effects of this case. Another peculiar incident about this actual case, if you have not done so, number one, make sure to check out the movie Star 80. It's a very true depiction of what actually happened to Dorothy. But also, Peter Donovich wrote a novel about Dorothy. But the interesting thing about Peter, in his novel, he talks about how these people took advantage of Dorothy. Hugh Hefner, Paul Snider, all these people, getting all the benefits of her success and fame. But when I took a look into Peter Donovich, he is a peculiar character when it comes to Dorothy's life. Not only did he love Dorothy so much, he ended up marrying Dorothy's sister, Louise, at the age of 49, and Louise was only 20 years old. Now, they did divorce in 2001, but I felt like, inasmuch as Louise was one of the last people to see Dorothy before she passed away, a person who you were going to marry and spend the rest of your life, the person you stated was the love of your life, you ended up marrying her sister. I think this case is crucial to just understanding. Be careful who you allow in your life and what is their intentions overall, because Dorothy was gone too soon. Her innocence was adored and admired and loved, but in that love it became obsession. And there are a lot of people to blame for the demise of it. But one thing we need to say is, honor the living while they're here. Let go of the people who have ulterior motives. Comment down below if you know any more key information about Dorothy, and even just Playboy or Peter or Louise or Paul Snider as well. Like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time.